Imagine being humiliated and arrested in public for no reason, just because of the color of your skin. Now imagine flipping the script in court and exposing the cops' darkest secret. This is what happens when they mess with the wrong man. It started as a peaceful afternoon in a bustling California park. Families were out enjoying the sun, kids were laughing, and joggers were making their rounds. In the midst of it all, a black man sat quietly on a bench, scrolling through his phone. Nothing about him stood out, except one thing: his skin color. That alone was enough to attract the attention of two patrolling cops who seemed determined to disrupt his day. The officers approached him with an air of arrogance, their voices already carrying an edge of hostility. "Hey, what are you doing here?" one barked, as if his mere presence was a crime. The man looked up, confused but calm, and replied, "I'm just sitting here, enjoying the park." But that wasn't enough for them. They demanded his ID, accusing him of loitering and making vague references to suspicious activity. When he calmly asked what crime he had committed, the situation escalated. Their voices grew louder, drawing the attention of onlookers, and their demands turned into threats. One officer sneered, "You people always think you can get away with this." The man remained composed, refusing to argue or escalate the situation. But his silence seemed to infuriate them even more. Within minutes, they decided to make an example out of him. "Stand up." "You're under arrest," one officer snapped, grabbing his arm roughly. The man complied without resistance, but the humiliation had already begun. Parents covered their children's eyes, joggers stopped in their tracks, and whispers spread through the crowd. The cuffs were slapped on his wrists as they paraded him toward their squad car. The officers didn't stop there. They hurled insults under their breath, calling him names that echoed the deep-rooted racism they clearly didn't bother to hide. "Bet you've got a record a mile long," one of them muttered, laughing with his partner. Through it all, the man stayed silent, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. That calmness wasn't what they expected, and it unnerved them, but their arrogance wouldn't let them back down. They shoved him into the back of the car, slamming the door with unnecessary force. The crowd stood in stunned silence as the car sped away, leaving a bitter reminder of the racial injustice playing out in broad daylight. At the station, the treatment didn't improve. They mocked him as they processed his paperwork, one officer even claiming, "You're lucky we're not throwing the book at you." The man, still silent, gave them no clue about who he was or the power he held. They assumed he was just another black man they could dehumanize without consequence. Little did they know, the tables were about to turn in a way they couldn't have imagined. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality of who they were dealing with, and it would cost them everything in court the next day. The situation escalated quickly, but it wasn't surprising to anyone who understood the reality of being black in America. The two officers who arrested the man seemed completely unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the injustice they were committing. As they drove him to the station, they exchanged smug comments, their tone dripping with superiority. "Bet he's got a warrant or two," one officer said, glancing in the rearview mirror. They always do. The man, sitting in the back seat with his hands cuffed, didn't respond. He kept his composure, staring out the window as if their words were nothing more than background noise. His calmness only seemed to irritate them further. The other officer turned in his seat, sneering. "Not gonna say anything? You think you're too good for us, huh?" At the station, the disrespect continued. The booking officer gave him a cursory glance, shaking his head as if his guilt was already decided. "Another one of these guys," he muttered. The arresting officers laughed, sharing a moment of camaraderie over their shared prejudice. They seemed completely comfortable, as if this was routine for them. The man didn't argue, didn't demand explanations, and didn't lash out. He simply followed their instructions, his silence now a quiet defiance that unsettled everyone around him. The more composed he seemed, the more they tried to provoke him. One officer even leaned in close and whispered, "Nobody's coming to help you. Just another day for us." Meanwhile, the man's belongings were searched without care or respect. They rifled through his wallet, casually tossing aside his credit cards and ID. One officer even scoffed at the sight of a business card tucked neatly in a sleeve. He didn't bother to read it, assuming it wasn't worth his time. Instead, they focused on demeaning him further, throwing around baseless accusations about drug possession and petty crimes. While they laughed and mocked him, something extraordinary was unfolding outside the walls of that police station. Word of the arrest began to spread, and those who witnessed the incident at the park started sharing videos on social media. Comments poured in, questioning the officer's actions and calling for accountability. It was the spark of something bigger, a demand for answers that would soon reach far beyond the park or even the city. Back inside the station, the man was placed in a holding cell. The officers, now bored, didn't give him a second thought. They had no idea that their casual cruelty would come back to haunt them. They didn't know that the man they'd treated like a criminal wasn't just anyone. He was someone with power, influence, and a deep understanding of the law. Someone who knew exactly how to handle a situation like this. As the night wore on, the man remained calm, mentally preparing for what he knew would come next. He didn't need to defend himself to the officers. He didn't need to shout or demand respect. He simply waited, knowing that the truth would reveal itself soon enough. The officers, on the other hand, continued their routine as if they were untouchable. They bragged about the arrest, joked about how easy it had been, and made plans for their next shift. It was clear they didn't see the man as a person, just a target, another statistic in their record. But cracks were beginning to show. The videos from the park gained traction online, catching the attention of local activists and even a few journalists. Questions were being asked. Why was this man arrested? What had he done wrong? The public was demanding answers, and the officers' actions were about to come under a microscope. By the time morning came, the stage was set for a confrontation they never expected. The man, calm as ever, was escorted into the courtroom. The officers walked in confidently, ready to justify their actions. They still had no idea who they were dealing with or the fallout that awaited them. As the judge entered, the atmosphere shifted. It was clear that today wouldn't go as the officers had planned. The courtroom was silent as the man walked in, his calm demeanor unchanged. He wore the same clothes from the day before, but something about his presence felt different. The officers sat confidently at their table, their arrogance still intact. To them, this was just another routine case. They had no idea their world was about to collapse. The judge entered, signaling the start of the proceedings. The prosecutor, the same man they had arrested, rose to address the court. The officers exchanged puzzled glances. Why was this man standing up? It didn't take long for the realization to hit them. The man they had mocked, humiliated, and arrested was a federal prosecutor. Gasps filled the courtroom as the judge acknowledged him with respect. The man introduced himself, stating his position and laying out the facts of his arrest. The officers' smug expressions melted into disbelief. One of them whispered to his partner, "What's happening?" The other, now pale, shook his head, speechless. The prosecutor didn't raise his voice or use dramatic gestures. He calmly presented his account of the events at the park, each word cutting through the officer's false narrative like a knife. He revealed how they had approached him without cause, escalated the situation, and subjected him to verbal abuse. But he didn't stop there. "Your Honor," he said, holding up his wallet. "Inside here was my ID, which clearly identifies me as a federal prosecutor. They never bothered to check. They assumed my guilt based solely on the color of my skin." The room was tense as he continued. Video evidence from bystanders was played, showing the officers' aggressive behavior. The recordings captured their insults, their unnecessary use of force, and their blatant disregard for the man's rights. The truth was undeniable. The officers tried to defend themselves, stumbling over their words. "We thought he was acting suspicious," one of them muttered, avoiding eye contact with the judge. But their excuses fell flat. The prosecutor countered with legal precedents, exposing their actions as not just unprofessional, but blatantly illegal. As the evidence piled up, the courtroom's mood shifted completely. The officers, who had walked in with confidence, now sat slouched and defeated. The judge's face hardened as she addressed them. "Your actions were not only an abuse of power, but a disgrace to the uniform you wear." The prosecutor delivered a closing statement that left the room in stunned silence. "This case isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every person who has suffered because of unchecked prejudice and misuse of authority. This stops now." The judge announced that the case would proceed to an internal investigation, and the officers would face disciplinary action. They left the courtroom in disgrace, their careers hanging by a thread. As the prosecutor walked out, onlookers erupted into applause. The man who had been silenced and humiliated just a day before had turned the tables, proving that justice can prevail, even in the face of hatred. The courtroom verdict sent shockwaves through the community, exposing the depths of prejudice and the consequences of unchecked power. The prosecutor's unwavering calm and evidence dismantled the officers' lies, holding them accountable for their actions. This case wasn't just about one man. It became a symbol of standing up against systemic racism and abuse. By turning their arrogance into their downfall, the prosecutor proved that justice, when pursued with determination, can prevail. The impact rippled far beyond that day, sparking important conversations about equality, accountability, and the fight for fairness. Change starts when injustice is confronted head-on. Don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe now for more stories that expose the truth. Please note, this is not a real story. It's a work of fiction only for education and entertainment purposes.